With decades of experience, what's something that you wish you knew earlier?
That these types of careers exist, that you can have jobs where you're a problem solver and a logical thinker and working on things that are difficult, but you can still be client facing and get that customer interaction that you enjoy.
Maybe a hot take. You said that you advise new consultants to embrace their early years and not rush into that next step.
When you get in the real world, it's different. Instead of doing the work, you're thinking up the design and writing it out for someone else to do it. That's so valuable when you get out there and you start leading projects of your own, to have that type of thing under your belt.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Power Talks. My name is Griffin, the host of the Citizen Developer channel and Power Talk series. Today, I'm joined by special guest Jenny Cuevas. Jenny, thank you so much for being here. You have a really interesting, maybe a hot take, but a lot of what we talk about on this show is how we can advance our careers as consultants or Power Platform developers or architects. But you said that you advise new consultants to embrace their early years and not rush into that next step. I wanted to ask you why that was so important.
I just think there's so much value in experience. We get into that consultant role. A lot of us have come up through a launch program or associate program or whatever our organization calls it. And, they teach you how to configure, and you pass these certification tests, and you do all these mock, kind of playing like you're on a project and things like that. But when you get in the real world, it's different, right? And so every organization's different. Every project is different. And I think that that's so valuable when you get out there and you start leading projects of your own, to have that type of thing under your belt. I can't tell you how many times there'll be like an error on a solution import that is telling everyone nothing, and you Google it and nothing, and somebody throws it out in the chat and they're like, oh yeah, I saw that. You named your field the same as some other field, or some random stupid error, and you would only know that by experience. And so I just think, trying to rush to that next step, like just kind of sit where you're at and learn what you can and take it all in. And also the other thing would be like that transition into that more project leadership role, whether you're becoming a senior consultant or some sort of a lead or an architect or whatnot, is just, it's different. It's like, instead of doing the work and configuring, you're thinking up the design and writing it out for someone else to do it. Like, that's a really hard skill, to write out an entire plan of how you would design a solution, to not be hands-on with it, right? It's a completely different skill set. So I just think you have to grow into that. Like, just give it time.
I do think there is a learning curve to designing, and I like to think I'm sharpening those skills, but they're definitely not sharp yet. I think about one of the first things you said, and like not rushing into it. And I know for myself, I'm a big dream person or goal person. That's what I mean. Like, I like to set aspirational goals, and I tend to want to achieve more than maybe my peers or people around me. And I'm not saying I'm necessarily more successful than them, but I want more, right? I guess is maybe what I'm trying to say. And so I find that I am often thinking about wanting to fast forward things. So I think it's really like, I think that the idea of experience really is that important, because like, yeah, a certification is great, but it's super different, real world experience. And like, something I've shared on this show before is, I was on a project, and like, if I got one thing out of that project, it was like the importance of scope, because I got into the weeds of like, hey, let's figure out, like, beginning of the project, let's figure out what fields we want in this view and on the form, and all these details that were not business critical. And I like kicked the can on the stuff I didn't really know about that was more business critical, because I didn't want to have to think about it yet. I wanted to stay like in my comfort zone. And I think that was like, I don't know, the smoking gun of, hey, I do not have the skills because of my experience, at least at that point in time. And I don't know if you have any extra thoughts on that or like a similar experience with maybe consultants that are like wanting that, but you can just look at them and be like, just pump the brakes. It's not time yet, you know?
Yeah, I actually just had a conversation with a couple of associates in our program that, well, I guess they're not associates anymore. They've been consultants for a year or two, and they're looking to kind of take that next step. And I'm like, whoa, like you've just been a consultant for a year or two. Just hang out where you're at, get some more experience, you know? But I find myself doing that too. And I know that about myself, that I will kick the can down the road and procrastinate on things that are more difficult. And so what I found is I'm a really logical thinker. And if I can't think through the solution all the way to the end, I kind of put it off. Oh, I'll work that story later. Oh, I'll work that story later, you know? And I've had to really challenge myself to say, let's just bite it off in pieces. Let's at least get a first draft out there. We can iterate on it. It's not going to be perfect the first time. It's really hard for people who tend to be perfectionists or like, you know, that like to get it right the first time. But yeah, that's challenging for me too. So yeah, I guess if you're doing it as well, I'm sure there's a lot of us in this industry that are like, oh, it's a little more difficult. It's going to take a little more effort. I'll kick the can down the road. Yeah, definitely
Yeah,
see that.
absolutely. With decades of experience, what's something that you wish you knew earlier?
Gosh, that makes me sound old. Decades of experience. My goodness.
Hey, to be fair, this was your words. All
I
right, you know, I
know.
wasn't gonna put you on blast here, but no. But seriously, you know, you have that experience that we're talking about. Like, what's something wish you had known earlier in your career?
So when I was coming up in high school and trying to decide where I wanted to go to college and things like that, I was a really poor kid. And it was like, I went to a university that I'd gotten a scholarship to. And when I got there, this professor said, hey, we're giving out a scholarship. Whoever takes the exam and gets the highest score will get the money. But you have to be a chemistry major. So I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Great, I'll sign up. And so I went and signed up and, you know, took the test to get the money. And so I ended up with a bachelor's in chemistry. I learned a lot from that, though. I learned that I like logical thinking. I learned that I like math. I learned that I like to problem solve, and lots of different things from that. But what I didn't know at the time was that a career in chemistry was kind of an introverted type of thing. You're in a lab, you're not talking to people, whatever, right? And I did a year of grad school and decided I had to get out of it. I had to get out of it, and I needed something that was client facing, that I was customer facing. I could interact with people. And so I think the thing that I wish I knew earlier is that these types of careers exist. That you can have jobs where you're a problem solver and a logical thinker and working on things that are difficult like what we do, but you can still be client facing and get that customer interaction that you enjoy. I don't know. I didn't know this kind of thing existed when I was coming up. Maybe it didn't. Maybe I'm too old.
No, I had no idea as well. Like when I had basically fell into kind of the Power Platform and what I do now through a reference at my current employer who was a Scrum Master, like completely untechnical role, and I knew he worked fully remote, and I was just like, we all kind of had an idea of what he kind of did. We knew he worked with like Microsoft and like whatever,
Yeah.
but like that was kind of it. And I was studying accountancy and entrepreneurship, and I am pretty risk averse, so I did not want to just like become an entrepreneur as a 22-year-old. And in my last semester, maybe I had just had a bad professor, but I was like, I could not be an accountant. But I liked math, I liked that logical thinking, and I liked how it was, you know, business oriented. And yeah, basically through my reference, he's like, hey, we have this, you know, kind of CE consultant role, and I think you might be good at it. And, you know, we have this kind of associate program, whatever. And one thing led to another. And so I remember I was, you know, Googling Microsoft Dynamics in my interviews and, you know, all this stuff. And like, or before my interviews, all right, pump the brakes, anybody out there. But, you know, before my interviews, because I had heard of the letters CRM, but I had no idea about a specific
Yeah.
system or anything. And so I I think that's really interesting, and it's kind of a good segue into the next kind of topic I wanted to ask you, in that you started your career in operations leadership before actually moving into, kind of technology consulting and, Microsoft Dynamics and yada yada. Like, what kind of sparked that shift? I'm sure there's a story here. Like, what is the synopsis of that there for you?
Yeah, I never thought that I would work in technology. And like you said, I was in operations leadership roles, leading compliance teams and accounting teams and things like that. And my organization was going to implement Dynamics CRM. This is the 2011 version, right? And so we got a partner. They brought these people in. They start doing their requirements gathering. And I am brought in as a SME for the operations department. And we start talking, and I start seeing what they're building, kind of that iterative sprint demo kind of approach. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And, you're in the meeting with him and you're like, oh, but we need one more option in that drop down. Okay. He would just add it in there, boom. And I'm like, I could do this, And so about a year into the project, we were almost ready to go live with the first office. And the project manager who worked for our organization resigned. And I asked if I could move into her role. And I lived in Dallas, Fort Worth at the time, and she was in the Miami office. And they said, well, I don't know. This was back when no one worked 100% remote. It was kind of unheard of. And so they said, well, you'll have to come to Miami, and oh, it was terrible, let me tell you. No, I was single. I did not have any kids. It was great. I went to Miami every 2 weeks for a year to get this thing off the ground. And it was an awesome transition into that role, learning to be, I first came in as a business analyst and project manager, kind of helping with that. Then I kind of became the primary one doing all of the configuration work. At the time, we didn't have Power Automate or anything like that. We just had workflows and oh gosh, I don't know if you know what these are, dialogues. They were on-screen, step-by-step wizard that you could build, Those are deprecated now, but they were great. But anyway, so yeah, I moved on to the technology team and just kind of worked my way up there. I eventually became the director of the software delivery team there and did that for about 10 years. So yeah, it was an interesting transition into technology, but it seemed really seamless because I just knew the business so well. It helped for them to have someone in technology that knew the business that well.
Is there one challenge in particular that sticks out to you for that time of kind of going from that end user role to more of that solution development and even kind of consulting role? I'm wondering what was kind of the biggest challenge for that learning curve for you.
Really, it was just learning the platform because I had done so much process improvement. We worked a lot in Excel at the time. I'd built some pretty robust spreadsheets and things to handle some of our business needs, and I felt like I was pretty tech savvy at that point. So moving over, it was really just learning the platform. And I knew nothing about agile methodology or how to use scope creep or anything. I knew what requirements gathering was, but only from the perspective of tell me what you want. Okay, great. We'll try to build it. There was zero structure. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. But yeah, I think the hardest part was just the platform, understanding what solutions were, understanding publishers, just kind of the basics, right? Of, I don't know, just everything. And I didn't really have any formal platform training until maybe a year or two into that role on the technology team. And then I started to really, go to some of the conferences, join the user group in my area. I started reading Microsoft Learn and watching a bunch of videos. And that's when I really kind of got into this is was really cool, you know, learning something new.
Hey, if you are finding this video impactful or insightful, be sure to like and subscribe. But more importantly, if you are wanting to learn more about the Microsoft Power Platform, then you are going to want to check out the completely free self-paced course that has all of the hand-picked content directly from me as the first link down in the description down below. This is going to teach you everything you need to know about the Power Platform to get started and pass your first few Microsoft certifications. I can honestly say that as a Power Platform consultant myself, that I love what I do, and I don't think many people in today's day and age can say that. If you are wanting to learn more, as I mentioned, be sure to check out the first link in the description down below to get in direct contact and connect with me. All right, let's get back to the conversation. I'm like putting the pieces together. I'm like putting the timeline together for you. So what was then like a habit or a discipline that you could attribute to the success from like that moment to, okay, now you're starting to learn some of the tech, and you know, maybe you're a year, 2 years into that role to, I mean, maybe to where you're at now might be too big of a jump. We could probably break that out. But like, what was one habit or discipline that helped attribute to the success that you've had since moving into that side of the world, I guess?
I am really good at documentation. I really just am. I worked in a doctor's office when I was in college, and if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And I have just gotten that way with, you know, whether you're working in ADO or Jira or whatever system you're working in, just keeping that backlog clean and crisp, always updating it. Every time you have a meeting, you do anything, it's always logged. Every time, every time. It just makes it easy for people to come behind you and pick up where you left off. Or, you know, if you're like me lately and you have 500 things going, like you may have slept a few times since you touched that story, and to see the comments and the write-up and stuff, it just kind of like, oh, okay, quick refresher. I don't have to remember things. I think documentation is super, super important, and I really harp on that with any consultants that are on my projects.
Yeah. So I think one thing as well, like me and the people I've worked with in the past, a lot of the times one of the reasons why it's so important is not just to remember what happened, but also to like cover yourself a little bit, you know, when the time comes to maybe, you know, more like end-to-end testing and like, hey, why is this way, that you have the ability to reference that from like a, I don't know if you'd call it like liability standpoint, but you know, like from that stance. And I wonder, like,
Well, but you
I'm
can
thinking
also
about,
see the iteration on something, right? So you start with the first story and then the next story. And sometimes the client comes back and questions, well, who changed that? Who made that decision? Who approved that? You know, and so having the ability to go back in the system and just, it's there, you know, there's no question. So yeah, exactly. Kind of just covering yourself from a contractual perspective, right?
yeah. How do you handle these like maybe tougher project situations? I mentioned scope creep earlier, but things like that, or misaligned expectations. Like, how are you navigating situations like that? How is maybe documentation playing a role into that? Like, what's your methodology there?
So you definitely have to have a way to tag those new stories or that scope creep in your system. So whether you like put them under a separate feature, or you label them, or you have a status or something, however you can document that kind of stuff. I try to be really communicative about, great, I don't mind taking this on. Is it more important than these other things that are still in the backlog, the remaining stories that we said we would get done before the end of the project? Because if we insert this one, right, something at the bottom's going to fall off. Are we okay with that? You know, and just trying to really communicate that. Scope creep is a big issue because it is difficult a lot of times, especially you're on sales projects, especially for salespeople, to visualize, to imagine what a new system or what a new solution could look like, right? So, yeah, it's a big one. I try to leave some space for that, though, right? When you're estimating on a project, try to leave a little space for that.
I think too, like, there's things, because at the very beginning of a project, right? Maybe even like the pre-sales stage, like people, we're casting this vision for this company of like what the system could look like, how it could improve their day to day from a really detailed perspective, but also, you know, from looking at huge reports and whatever. Like we're constantly casting this vision, even in like your backlog refinement sessions, right? You're like, hey, what do we want this to look like? How do we want this to operate? And a lot of times, you know, now that you get this kind of like base system in place, now it's like, oh, wait, now I can see, now that we have this, I can now see this, you know, I now have this new vision for that. And I think that like learning how to navigate those conversations is like, maybe that's like the skill that consultants who want to be architects, like one of the skills they really need to sharpen, because I feel like those, even just from like a soft skill level, are really hard to navigate. You know, I mean, I guess it's easy to look at, you know, the bucket of hours and the remaining capacity and be like, oh yeah, nope, sorry. But like actually communicating that, like, what's kind of your approach? I know people, you know, communicate and say things very differently. Like, what's Jenny's approach to telling people they can't have what they want in like a scenario like that?
I hope that my clients are not watching this, right? I lead every tough conversation with a compliment. That's a really great idea. Oh my gosh, you're right. That would make things so efficient. I wish we had thought of that earlier in the process. Let's look at what we've got on the board. Let's kind of talk through, if we were to insert this, maybe what might we not be able to get done, right? And kind of just going through the effort, you know, if they seem like they're, well, why is that so hard? It seems like it would be fairly easy. Then sometimes you have to talk through a little bit of the details of what's involved in the build, what resources are involved, you know, things like that. But I think always just kind of coming back at the end to like, your time and your budget are very important to us. And so we want to make sure that we're going to be able to deliver what we say we can, right? And that's the goal of the whole thing. So I think just trying to have like a down to earth conversation with them. It doesn't always work, I'll say that. And that's why we work in teams, because I feel like if I'm not getting the right response, sometimes it helps to send someone else in, like your PM or, you know, your lead architect or your director of client experience or whatever that role is in your organization. Sometimes it helps to send someone else in. So
yeah. In talking to and getting to kind of know you, and just you were sharing that you had an experience recently where you were, I don't know if you'd call it a difficult project, but you know, where there were like unforeseen hiccups in the solution, that it sounds like. As far as, I wrote this down because I didn't want to get it wrong. You were recently on a project that utilized enhanced record queues with the new custom assignment methods, prioritization rule sets, and skills matching. What happened? What were some of these challenges that you guys were experiencing here?
Yeah, so this was customer service implementation, and we were using setting up a work stream, right? And so with those work streams, you can choose what type of work stream it is. This was a records work stream, and it was set up specifically to manage cases. And so once we got into building, you can set up custom assignment methods now. This is something that just rolled out last year. So previously, there were only 2 out-of-the-box assignment methods if you wanted your cases pushed, right? Like automatically assigned to the agents. And those were round robin and capacity based. And so we went in and said, well, we actually want to set up a custom assignment method. So click create, you know, you're going in there. So the first thing you do is you create that new one, and it pulls up, you've got your prioritization rule set that you can put together, and then you've got your assignment rule set that you can put together. So prioritization rules were also new at the time. And basically what that means is you can tell the system how to prioritize the cases in the queue. So how to sort them, how to organize them. And so you can set rules. It doesn't have to be like one column, sort this way kind of thing. It can be like, okay, if it meets this criteria, it's in bucket number 1. And it's going to try to assign out everything from bucket 1 first. And if there's nothing in bucket 1 it can assign out, it'll go to bucket 2 and then bucket 3 and however many buckets you want to have. I think on this project we had like 9 or 10 buckets. But it was really cool and we're like, oh, this is really neat. So then we get down to the assignment methods and you hit add new and it automatically populates on there some conditions. And this happens on all of the new rules. Like when you hit create, the first line item is that it's going to do an exact match on user skills. Great. And then it's got a couple of other things. Well, come to find out weeks later when it wasn't working, that exact skill match algorithm is not available on custom assignment methods. And so, of course, when it's not working, you start digging into the Microsoft Learn documentation, and literally it was there in black and white. It just said, and I was like, well, why would they even put that on the rule? Why would that be a default option? You know, it's kind of misleading a little bit, but then we read on and it said, but you can create your own custom condition to do your own custom skills matching. And I was like, because it didn't give any more details. And like the more I Googled, the more I could find that like there were really no examples out there of anyone who had done this. And granted, it was, like I said, a newer feature. And so thankfully for this particular customer, it was one skill per case. So I wasn't dealing with like multiple skills, which made it easier. And so what we ended up doing was putting a skill field on the case and using a Power Automate to populate that. And then on the user record, they had this, we reused an existing multi-line text field that just listed all of their skills in a comma separated format. So then the logic would say, if on the case, this skill field exists in that user's, skill list, then it's a match, right? So, I mean, thankfully it worked, but at first I didn't think it did. So whenever you first start working in the customer service admin center, most of the documentation I read said if you make changes, it takes about 15 minutes to sync, right? Well, we found that it actually took an overnight sync to get those new columns, those custom columns, into Customer Admin Center. So the first day I did it, and I thought it didn't work, and I worked on like trying other solutions for a couple of hours, and then I come in the next day, and my column's there. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I set it up, and we tested it, and sure enough, it worked. But I just thought that was like such an interesting use case that we hadn't seen that before. And then, so we got over that hurdle and we started testing some more. Then we started having a little bit of trouble with like the capacity not resetting correctly when it would assign a case and then they would complete the case. It like wasn't releasing that out and resetting their available capacity. I don't know. It just was a challenging project. We did find out that there is an overnight process that runs that resets all the agents' capacity at the end of the night. So I guess in case there is a hiccup throughout the day, at least it will be fixed that night, which is nice, but doesn't help during the day when agents are, trying to work. So I don't know, just kind of some nuances with some of the newer features that I thought were kind of interesting. And actually, the one with the user skill matching default, I checked it before I got on here, and they have renamed it. So when you are setting up your work stream assignment rules, and there was a field on there that said skills matching algorithm, and you would choose one. Well, you kind of assume that when you're choosing it at that level, it flows down to everything, but it doesn't. They've now relabeled it to default skills matching algorithm. And now you would think, okay, well, that's what's going to default when I create a new assignment rule. It still doesn't do that. It still puts the skills matching on every single one. So I think they're getting there, right? They've renamed it, or we're getting there. So I think it's a really cool feature, though. I love the idea of having custom assignment methods and having the prioritization rules. It makes the solution much more flexible. But I think it's just, a work in progress a little bit.
Why? That's incredible. Just the story, and I appreciate you sharing all of that, and just I think it's funny in that I feel like it's more common than people would like to admit, where maybe a first pass at something that might be a little tricky, and you start building it, and you kind of build it and just kind of unit test it, and it kind of works, but then you hand it off to somebody else who's maybe wasn't so involved in the design and the build. And they're like, hey, this isn't working. And then it comes to, looking at the documentation. Sure enough, there's some little note in a purple square, or there's a little golden line in there. So I think we've all been there. I wanted to ask you though, like, why was, kind of speaking up and admitting to the oversight as early as you did, like, so important for, like, in this scenario, especially for the project, but also maybe just like building some, furthering that relationship with the client?
Yeah, there's two things. I think that transparency with the client, with your struggles with the product, just develops kind of a trust, right? If they feel like they're kept in the loop on the timelines, with this particular solution, we had an end of year delivery timeline, which basically meant we had to be code complete by the beginning of December to get it in by the end of the year and out to production. And it was tight. There was a lot of work to do. And so kind of keeping that open line of communication, because they're thinking like, we haven't seen this in an end of sprint demo yet. When's it coming? When's it coming? You say you're working on it. What's going on? So kind of just keeping them in the loop on that Microsoft ticket, what we're working through. We tried this solution. We tried that solution, so that they know that we're really trying to tackle this. That's the number one. I think it builds client trust. You have to be a little careful about everything, sharing everything though. And then number two, though, I think is our team was able to swarm that solution together. So the fact that we would like, okay, I think we have a solution, and then someone would test it and they'd be like, oh, it doesn't work. And then we would all jump on a call real quick. Okay, because, when you're testing something like that, you need 6 or 7 different agents all logged in at once. So you can see if the rules work right, the skills work right, things like that. Just the teamwork and the solutioning that we were able to do. I mean, there are just so many brilliant people in this space, and I don't know that we could have figured it out if it was just one of us or just 2 of us. Like, definitely everybody had a part in that.
Man, that's super awesome. I have another, maybe a transition here. It's definitely a transition, but I have another topic I want to talk to you about, and that is this, like, mentoring, but also maybe starting it off with, you led the Dallas-Fort Worth area CRM user group for 2.5 years. I kind of wanted to ask you, like, what sort of impact did that experience have on you, and like, what did it teach you about community building and the value of user groups?
Yeah, it was my first experience networking with other people that were working with Dynamics. This was right when I'd moved over to the technology team, and I was online, trying to figure out free ways that I could get education on Dynamics. And I saw the user groups, but they didn't have one in Dallas. And so I reached out to the organization, I think it was Dynamics Communities, and said, hey, what do we do to start one? And she said, oh, all you have to do is say you want to start one. And she kind of walked me through it. And I asked the partner that we had at my organization at the time if they would do the first speaking engagement. And they were like, sure, great. Well, once we had our first meeting, there were several partners that showed up, and there were several end users that showed up. And then it kind of turned into this community of people that it was a bunch of regulars, but it was so neat because we would hear about each other's projects. We could come in there with things we were struggling with and talk about different solutions that we had implemented in our organization. Partners were there to help. It was almost like free advice, it was great. It just was really fun and interesting, and the I would basically just coordinated the food and the speakers, like just trying to find speakers, and then people would show up. So I would say if you are with a partner, offer to speak at these community engagements because end users love it. I mean, they get a lot out of it, and it really makes them more invested in the product.
Yeah. How one quick question on that. How does somebody find a user group for their area? Like how does like I live, I say this all the time. Of all cool places in the world to live, I live in Fargo, North Dakota. How would I go about finding the Fargo Power Platform or Microsoft Dynamics user group? Maybe
Yeah,
that's a
there's
simple one.
actually, I think there's a couple of organizations that do user groups now, but at the time it was just Dynamics Communities, and I think they went by something else at the time as well. But I just went on their website, and you can search by location, and then it tells you if there's a user group in your area or if there's not. I don't remember the exact process, but I'm sure Google, knows
Sure.
everything.
Super cool. I back on kind of the important stuff here. Why is mentoring so important to you and such an important part of your career?
I guess a couple of reasons. I like teaching because I feel like it is the best way to know if you really know something. If you can teach it to someone else, you've mastered it, right? So there's that, but also, I don't know, I kind of see myself as like, I really like being a mom. And so when I see these younger consultants come up and they become bigger consultants, I don't know, I just love seeing them in front of a client. It's like a proud moment, that you invested time in them, that you invested knowledge in them, and to see them get out there and do this big thing, like be in front of this group of 60 executives leading, requirements gathering or whatever they're doing, or demoing a solution, or I just love that feeling. I just love that feeling.
Yeah. What is it like? My question is kind of like what has that even kind of done for you? Like I think about like in a perspective of even someone like myself, or maybe someone who's got, 5 years of experience and wants to start, not passing the baton, but you know what I mean? Like start
Yeah.
encouraging and mentoring other people. Like why has it not only been beneficial and really, impactful and fulfilling and heartwarming to see other people, but like how has it also impacted you?
Well, specifically on the project I'm on now, I have 3 senior consultants and 2 associates. And being able to upskill them is like work off my plate, right? Because then you can delegate and you know that you've had those conversations about the right ways to do things. They start to kind of do things the way you do, or that you've had those knowledge transfer sessions. They can handle things that you're going to give to them, right? I don't know. I guess from that perspective, it's like they're adding a lot of value to the project, to the organization. So that's helpful for me in that way too.
Yeah. What's somebody that you've mentored, what's maybe something that they told you that they loved about the mentorship? Like what's also the advice that you would give people to like become a better mentor, I guess is what I'm thinking. Like yeah, I'll give you the floor there. Yeah.
Yeah, availability. So I'd given this talk at Argano a while back about, I saw this video online and it kind of sparked something in me, but it was a different scenario, but it was about a guy talking about a friend who was struggling. And he said, "Why didn't you reach out to me?" And she said, "I did. I called, I texted, I emailed, you didn't call back or whatever." And he said, "Well, I didn't know it was urgent." And so he had read something in a psychology study where someone who is having a difficult or rough time only needs 8 minutes of time from someone that they trust to encourage them to turn it around. And so he said, him and his friend, their code word after that became, "Hey, do you have 8 minutes?" And so that's kind of been my mantra with anyone that I'm mentoring or anybody on my team is, I always have 8 minutes for somebody, right? 8 minutes is nothing. And so I just try to be available. If they need something, call them really quick. Even if I'm like in the car going to get the kids or something, like just get on the phone. Like, if you can answer a question to get them unblocked on their project. I mean, you've been there before. You're like on a Power Automate and you're like, oh, this one thing, And once you get past it, it's just such a relief. You can keep going. I mean, either that or even if it's just words of encouragement. I don't know.
No, I think that's insightful. I think that's something that is really cool about the Microsoft Dynamics, the Power Platform community, is just how, like, nobody gatekeeps. Like, no one's like, no, if you learn how to do this, then I am no longer gonna be as valuable. Like, nobody gatekeeps. Everybody is just like trying to figure it out and pull everyone along. And something that, like, has not only changed, what I wanted to do as a career, but, inherently, I guess it's changed my life in a way, because it supports me and my family. Like, it's just, and I wouldn't be able to have an opportunity like that if it wasn't for the people who went out of their way, on top of their 40 hours of billable work to pour energy and what they know into me. So I completely agree. I think that, like, in some way, that's one of the reasons why I love, even like I said before we started recording, like, was just saying, like, these conversations, if they're for anybody, are for me. But, like, that's like one of the main reasons why I feel like I want to, just share the little things that I'm learning online or on YouTube or in these conversations, because, like, I'm like, all right, if one person can get like one little nugget out of something, then, maybe some people will be like, oh man, his stuff doesn't get a ton of views or whatever. But if anything, it's one thing that's like, it's impacting one person. You know what I mean? And I think that I'm trying to, a little bit of a tangent here, but I'm trying to, I guess, measure success that way. You know what I mean? And the impact that it can have, because I feel like for me, especially when I was like brand new, it would have been really hard for me to learn from somebody with 20 years of experience, because, like, they're speaking a language that I just do not speak. And I'm even prone to it now too, with only just 2.5 years where I start speaking this language. But I think that's even more important for people that are at that, like, 2 to 5 year mark. Like, you can still kind of remember what it was like to be going, like, to be a year, 6 months in, 6 weeks into learning the Power Platform, and you can still kind of remember what that was and bridge that gap a little bit,
Yeah, but I think that's one of the skills of a really great consultant, is the ability to be a translator, right? So being able to take it down a notch and speak the layman's terms and upskill that client as you get more into the project, right? Then they start to learn the terminology and they start to speak it. But in the beginning, it's you learning their language, right? You speaking their language. And it's funny, we have this client last year where at some point they kept using the word notion, like when they would want to suggest a solution. Well, I would notion that you do this or do that. They were saying it so much, I found myself doing it. I'm like, well, I would notion. And it's like funny, because as a consultant, you try to fit into their culture. You try to fit into their language model. You try to know their business. And you want to do the same for them. You want to pull them into the Dynamics culture a little bit, but it takes time. So yeah, I know you had asked me before we got on here, like, what makes a great consultant? And that's the answer I'd written down, is the ability to speak each other's language.
Yeah. It's funny you mention a specific word choice too. It reminds me, so when I was probably 2 weeks into my current job, I guess, like, learning about it, with my whole cohort of, all of us also learning it, somebody used the word granular. I don't remember who or what the context was, but somebody used the word granular. And by the next week, we were all saying the word granular. We had never used it before, ever, in the history of my vocabulary. But for some reason, not only does that word, I feel like, fit perfectly in what you're trying to describe sometimes, but it was just so funny. And it was like a joke of like the next week of like, yo, why are we all saying granular? It was because such and such said it last week, but whatever. So I don't know. That just reminded me of that.
So funny. Seriously, I hope my client does not watch this.
No, it's all good. I mean, yeah. We're the terrible clients. Yeah, that's us. We're the tough people. No, it's all good. No, it's funny. Yeah, I think sometimes, I think sometimes it can be funny because you might feel like you're, at least talking about certain people, and certain people might know you're talking about them, but people really don't. But nonetheless, it's all good. Sweet. Well, I would love to go ahead.
One more thing, kind of back on the mentorship thing. Do you have mentors since you've become a consultant because I feel like even though I've been doing this for 20 years, I can count my mentors on one hand. I literally could right now just name them off. There are 4 of them. They were people that were in leadership roles that took time out of their day to really coach me, to really upskill me, to really invest their time in me. And, 3 of them were solution architects. And I don't know, I just always think that just made such an impact on me. And I think about that, like, what legacy am I leaving in this organization or in this space? Because I'm not one to put out the YouTube videos or the trainings or go to the conferences or speak or things like that, mostly because I'm home taking care of kids all the time. But I feel like that's a way that I can impact the community. And so I just think, man, I wonder if I'm on anybody's list, like if I'm on their 5-finger list or whatever at the end of their career,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Short answer to that question is yes. I do think that it's something that I would be a lot more interested in pursuing more intentionally, I feel like I have a small handful of people where it's like this person is a mentor of mine in this area, even outside of work, but like, in this area and in this area and in this area. Like one person I work with pretty closely, Joe Unwin, he's a Microsoft MVP. Like he's kind of the first one that comes to mind with me. Exactly. He's kind of like my, I don't know if you'd call it MVP mentor, but just like shares me a lot of expertise on how he has pursued growing his personal brand. And so it's like, all right, him and I connect regularly and just like talk about things and all sorts of stuff. So that's like one that comes to mind. Joe, if you're listening, shout out. But as well,
Hello, Joe. Is that the YouTube channel?
Yeah, that's right. Blow Joe. He's actually Power Talks episode 1. If anybody listens all the way back, so he was episode 1. But yeah, I would love to start to wrap up the episode by putting us in the after hours happy hour segment of the show. Okay. Jenny, I love it. You definitely give off this like mom energy. That is a total compliment. I promise. You sound like a proud mom. Asking before, you said you have one son and one daughter, if that's correct. Yeah. So you're split, I guess, as far as the boy mom, girl mom. But what's kind of some of your favorite things or about being a mom, or some of your hobbies? They're probably just your kids' hobbies, but like
they're just
who's
hilarious.
Jenny outside of work a little bit?
Yeah, they're just hilarious. I'm really loving watching my 8-year-old love math. He's really gotten into math. He says, "Mom, tell me the hardest equation you know." And so I don't know. It's just really fun to see them grow and get bigger. I don't know. They're fun.
Yeah,
they're really fun.
That's super fun. What a weirdo liking math. I'm just kidding. But
well, it's funny because they did testing at school recently, and he is like off the chart with math, and he's like average in reading. which is exactly how all of my test scores looked all the way through college. And I was like, well, he got it honest too, you know.
Right. That was so me. I'll be honest. I think my reading comprehension is still horrible. Like absolutely.
Yeah, I'm
Are you the type of person where like I enjoy like something about reading? Like there's something really nice about like having a book, you know, cup of tea and you're just like, you know, or a hot drink and you're just, you know, reading and, you know, feeling studious. But then like I'll be like wake up, I guess, and be like 3 pages later, and I'm like, I have no idea what I just read, but my eyes were consciously like moving through each word, and I was thinking it, but I don't remember anything that I read. I
exactly.
remember I was probably like the age of your son, and I had like a school project, and I had to read this book, and I had to create like a little like a shoebox basically with all the little characters and stuff like a scene from the book in this shoebox was like the
Diorama. Is
project.
that what they call it?
Yeah,
Diorama.
yes, exactly. And the book, I don't remember if I picked it or if I got assigned it was I think it was called Treasure Island, which is like
Yes.
it's a much older book and it's not like old English, but it was not like third
No.
grade reading level English. And shout out my mom. We would read, you know, for, you know, every night we'd read, you know, 5 pages or whatever. So because
Yeah.
I couldn't read it, you know, but I could listen. I could listen. I was smart enough to like understand the story, but that was funny.
Yeah. So,
That's
fun fact here. I'm blind in my left eye. So I think that that makes me like where my other senses are heightened or something because I am an auditory learner. If I hear it, I will remember it. And so I found that I do much better with audiobooks than I do with actually reading an old style book. But anyway, so I've switched to audiobooks lately.
yeah, but you can't put an audiobook on a bookshelf. You know what I mean? Like you don't look
I
studious
know.
with
I
just
know.
kidding. I find too, it's funny that like people, yeah, we like to do things differently. I there's a lot of people not in my generation. You could miss me with a blog post. Like if I have a question and there's no YouTube videos, like even outside of work, you know, if I'm like how to blah 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 blah, I'm instantly on the Google, I'm instantly hitting videos. Like I'm going to YouTube.
Really?
I
Oh,
use YouTube to search stuff more than I feel like I use Google sometimes because like
no,
something
see,
about
there's
just
that
being able to see it and listen
generational
to
gap.
it
Nope,
is
nope,
just
nope.
way better for me.
I'm like,
So
just
I
give
don't
me
know.
the article, let me read it.
Yeah, that's not me, but it's just funny. It's just how some different people operate. But sweet, thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much for being here. You've been a super special guest, and I appreciate all the advice and everything that you've shared. If people were listening to this convo and either were positively impacted or wanted to get in contact with you, what would be the best way to connect with you or to reach you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Jenny Cuevas, Cuevas. So yeah, just reach out to me there. I love to connect with new people all the time. Like to have a good network. But thanks for having me,
Yeah.
Griffin.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the time and for sharing everything you did. And thank you to you for sticking to the end of the video. My name is Griffin Lickfeld, the host of the Citizen Developer channel and Power Talk series, and I'm excited to connect with you in the next one.